In Briar Hollow, the forest never slept. Locals spoke of whispers drifting through the trees, sounds that didn't belong to anything alive. Most ignored them. But one boy couldn't. He heard what others didn't. A secret language the trees seemed to speak only to him. Evan Marsh heard the forest in ways others never could. It wasn't just the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig. It was something deeper, a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards of his house. A constant, unsettling presence. That evening, like so many others, Evan sat at his desk, trying to focus on his history homework. But the hum was louder tonight. It seeped into the walls, a physical pressure against his ears. Then came the thud. A slow, rhythmic thudding, like a giant heart beating somewhere deep within the woods. Thud, thud. He glanced at the window, his pen frozen over the page. The forest outside was a wall of black. He tried to shake it off, to convince himself it was nothing. He went downstairs, where his dad was watching TV, the flickering blue light casting long shadows across the living room. "Dad, do you hear that?" Evan asked, his voice a little tight. His dad barely looked up. "Hear what, kiddo?" "The game's on. That thumping sound. It's coming from the woods." His dad finally muted the TV and listened for a moment. He shrugged. "Probably just coyotes, or maybe some deer. Nothing to worry about. Go, finish your homework." Evan nodded, but he wasn't convinced. He returned to his room, but the thumping hadn't stopped. It was closer now, and the low hum wasn't just a hum anymore. It was becoming layered, complex. Within the drone, he could almost make out faint, wispy sounds. They twisted and coiled around each other, like smoke. Whispers. At first, they were too faint to understand, just a sibilant hiss on the edge of hearing. But as the night grew darker and the house fell silent, they sharpened. They weren't just random sounds anymore. They were forming a word. His name. Evan. Evan Rue. Evan Rue. Come outside. He froze, his blood turning to ice. The voice was thin, reedy, like the wind whistling through a crack in the window, but it was unmistakable. It was calling to him. From the woods, he squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his hands over his ears. "It's not real," he whispered to himself. "It's just the wind." But the voice he feared most, the one he'd spent 3 years trying to forget, was about to return. The one that died with the last leaves of autumn, 3 years ago. A new voice cut through the others, soft and achingly familiar. It was a voice he knew better than his own, a voice from lullabies and bedtime stories, a voice that had been silenced forever. "Evan, sweetie, I need you." It was his mother. A sob escaped his throat. He stumbled back from the window, his chair clattering to the floor. He clapped his hands hard over his ears, trying to block her out, trying to block out the memory and the impossible sound. But it was useless. The forest hum only grew stronger. The rhythmic thudding of the forest's heart pounded in his chest, and his mother's voice wrapped around him, pulling him toward the darkness outside. He collapsed onto his bed, curling into a ball. But there was no escape. In Briar Hollow, the forest always gets what it wants. And tonight, it wanted Evan. That night, the forest wasn't just calling him, it was invading. A storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. The lights in our old house flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging everything into a thick, suffocating darkness. In the silence that followed, a new sound began. Knock, dot, dot, dot. Knock, dot, dot, dot. It wasn't at the door. It was coming from inside the walls, from behind the drywall itself. Pictures on the walls started to rattle. The floorboards beneath my feet vibrated, and then a whisper, thin and desperate, leaked through the cracks. Help me, dot, dot, dot. Please. Terrified, I grabbed the first flashlight I could find and bolted out the door, straight into the black woods. The wind howled, carrying strange groans and unnatural echoes. But then I heard her, my mother's voice, clear as day, guiding me deeper into the trees. Evan, dot, 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 right here, dot, dot, dot. Follow me, almost there, dot, 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 dot. Double quotes, and I followed. Because grief can lead us into shadows we were never meant to enter. The deeper Evan ventures, the more the forest twists around him. The trees contort into silent screams, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. The very ground seems to pulse beneath his feet, like the veins of some colossal, sleeping beast. A thick, unnatural fog coils around him, swallowing the path behind. He can't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following his every move. Wheat X-step. A chilling echo follows, perfectly in sync with his own. Crunch. Crunch. He whips around, but there's no one there. Just the suffocating silence of the woods. He finally breaks into a clearing, and his blood runs cold. In the center stands a massive, grotesque wooden totem, its surface carved with countless faces frozen in eternal agony. And at its base, dot, 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 a familiar silhouette. His mother, or at least, the thing that wore her shape. As it turns, its face begins to melt like wax, the jaws stretching impossibly wide. A gurgling voice slithers from its throat. We wore her voice. So you would come, dot, dot. Before Evan can react, thick roots erupt from the ground, wrapping around him like snakes. The creature presses its forehead to his, the voice now a whisper in his mind. We will wear yours. Dot, dot, dot. The forest fell silent. The chirping crickets, the rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, all of it just stopped. Then, the silence was broken by a single, chilling fact that would haunt the small town for years to come. Evan Marsh had vanished without a trace. In the frantic days that followed, search parties combed every inch of those woods. They found things, ominous things. Drag marks scarring the damp earth, leading from the path deep into the undergrowth. Twigs and branches snapped, as if from a struggle. A single, muddy boot print, too large to be Evan's. But of Evan himself, nothing. Not a footprint, not a shred of clothing, not a single clue to his whereabouts. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him whole. The case remains open, a cold, silent question mark in the town's history. Don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries. Years after the tragedy, a new family hoped for a fresh start in the quiet cabin. But the forest doesn't forget. One night, their young daughter woke up screaming, tears streaming down her face. She told her parents she heard a little boy's voice, just outside her window, whispering for help, saying he was lost. They tried to soothe her, telling her it was just a bad dream. But then, it started. A faint knocking, coming from inside the walls. Tap, tap, tap. The next morning, a weathered old woman from the village appeared at their door, her eyes filled with a deep-seated fear. You have to leave this place, she warned, her voice trembling. The forest has taken him. And now, it wants more. She explained the chilling local legend that the woods themselves are alive, that they learn to mimic the voices of those they claim, using them as bait to feed on the grief and fear of new victims. Once the forest has your voice, it has you forever. That night, a whisper snakes into the little girl's room. It's Evan's voice again, but this time it's filled with pain. Come help me. They hurt me. I'm so scared. She slips out of bed, drawn by his desperate plea, and disappears into the darkness. Her parents wake up to an empty room in pure terror. Their frantic search leads them back into the suffocating woods. They find her in the same clearing, standing like a statue before that cursed totem. From the shadows behind it, a twisted, nightmarish figure lurches forward. It speaks with Evan's voice, a chilling invitation. Stay. Join us. A chorus of ghostly voices echoes from all around, trapping them. The father grabs his daughter, pulling her back as grasping roots erupt from the ground and skeletal branches claw at them. Their screams are swallowed by the forest as they flee for their lives. Weeks have turned into a long, quiet month since the last frantic call to the police. The official report on the Briar Hollow case is now closed, stamped with a conclusion that feels both dismissive and deeply unsettling. Mass panic, the chief said, fueled by collective imagination. He spoke of how fear can play tricks on the mind, how shadows in the woods can become monsters when you're already scared. The strange noises, the disembodied whispers, the chilling sense of being watched, all attributed to a community on edge, a feedback loop of anxiety. It was an easy explanation, a neat little box to put all the terror in. And for the outside world, it was enough. The news cycle moved on, and Briar Hollow faded from the headlines. The family, however, couldn't just move on. They couldn't unhear the whispers or unsee the fleeting shapes in the fog. They packed their lives into cardboard boxers, leaving behind furniture, memories, and a piece of their sanity. The moving truck rumbled down the long driveway one last time, not a single person daring to look back at the house that had almost consumed them. As they drove away, the woods stood silent, watching, as if holding its breath. For a while, an eerie peace settled over the property. The for sale sign stood like a lonely sentinel, its bright red letters a stark warning against the dark green of the pines. It seemed the nightmare was finally over. The house was empty, the family was safe, and the forest had gone dormant. But in a place like Briar Hollow, peace is just the quiet space between screams. The woods don't forget. They wait. They listen. The neighbors, who had locked their doors and drawn their curtains, slowly started to breathe again. They told themselves it was over, just a strange, shared delusion. Then it began. It wasn't a frantic, terrified cry of a little girl this time. No, this was different. It started with Mrs. Gable, who was tending to her garden near the edge of her property. She thought she'd heard something on the wind, a faint murmur. She dismissed it as the rustling of leaves. A few days later, young Timmy Jenkins, who was retrieving his lost kite from the tree line, came running back to his house, pale and shaken. He told his mom he heard a man talking in the woods, but there was no one there. Soon, others heard it too. It was a man's voice. Unlike the girl's desperate pleas, his voice was soft, calm, almost gentle. It was a voice that didn't demand attention, but rather slid into your subconscious. A chillingly polite request that floated through the trees. It would come in the dead of night, a whisper carried on the breeze, or in the quiet stillness of the afternoon. It was always the same question, spoken with a heartbreaking sincerity that made you want to answer. To help. Can you help me? The voice would ask, a tone of weary sadness lacing the words. My daughter, she's lost in the woods. ... Double quotes, the cycle was beginning again. A new lure for a new season. The forest had simply changed its bait. In Briar Hollow, the forest never takes just one voice. It collects them.